We're going to talk now with our panel. You remember Garrett Haake. He is still with us. He's joined by Daniella Diaz, who's a congressional reporter for Politico, Democratic strategist Doug Thornell, and Brendan Buck, a former advisor to Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan. He's also an NBC News political analyst. So, Daniella, I want to pick up on something Garrett said before we went to Vaughn, and it's this idea that he's really just reaching out to his base. This is just a campaign that's built on turning out the base. Can he win a general election in 2024 if it's all based on revenge and trying to fire up the base that feels that somehow something was stolen from them in 2020?
And not only revenge, Ryan, I mean, you guys talked about that violent language that Trump is using that is also really riling these voters that could support him leading up to January, the next certification of the election. We don't know what that's going to look like. These are very violent words that he's using. But to your question, that's what we're tracking right now. What about those voters that haven't decided yet if they want to support former President Donald Trump or could support Biden? Those are the voters that are going to sway the election come November, and that's who he needs to be speaking to. But we're seeing him do his old strategy, the strategy that worked for him when he won the election in 2016, that didn't work for him in 2020, throwing out these really violent phrases, letting the audience interpret it as they want to take it, and we're going to see if that works again. Yeah,
so Brendan, it does seem as though it's a bit of a combo platter, right? It's either he is going to win, and if he doesn't win, it's because it's rigged. But it's also there's too much at stake for him to lose. I mean, at what point, if you're taking in this message, which resonates with you the most if you're a Trump supporter?
Well, if you're a Trump supporter, what he's done very well is make this so visceral that it is about your livelihood. Your life depends on whether or not this man wins. And that's how he's able to get so much energy and enthusiasm out of people. He really has convinced a lot of people that there are people in Washington, elites, who are out to end their way of life. And when that's the question, you're going to do some crazy things like they did at the Capitol on January 6th. And so that's where the energy comes from. As we've discussed, he is not wired to go towards Nikki Haley voters. He has no interest in doing that. I don't think they would be interested in hearing that. He's going to turn those people against Joe Biden by just making Joe Biden unacceptable and hopefully win by default that way.
And Doug, it's interesting. Donald Trump, I think, put out on his Truth Social account today, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I think all of us remember what was happening March of 2020 and what the circumstances were like. We were at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. The economy was tanking at that point. Donald Trump was giving these press conferences where he was going in all different directions. Is this something that the Biden team needs to lean into, this question of whether or not you're better off than you were 4 years ago?
Absolutely. Look, for my family, I lost a family member to COVID about 4 years ago today, around this time. So 100%. You remember where you were 4 years ago when he was talking about encouraging people to drink Clorox or bleach or whatever it was. He was running a totally hectic, crazy response to the coronavirus. The economy had shut down. He provided no confidence to the American people that he could manage a big crisis like this. And look, he lost. And we asked this question of whether or not this is going to work. It worked in 2016, but in 2018, in 2020, in 2022, it hasn't worked for Trump. So this is going to be an incredibly close election. I don't want Democrats to think that, at some point there's going to be a mass exodus from Trump to Biden. It's going to be really close. We live in a very divided country. But when Trump goes out there with a lot of these ugly, divisive words, I think it reinforces this notion that he lacks the character to be president. Again, he doesn't have the mental acuity. If these were mistakes in what he was trying to say, you got a question about, is he really up to being president again if he can't say basic things on the stump anymore? So, yeah, 100%. Biden should lean into, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Because the economy is better than it was 4 years ago. So let me expand on that a little bit. Because the Biden campaign quickly jumped on these bloodbath comments. They put out a quick digital ad. They're trying to amplify it as much as possible. Is that the strategy it seems as though Trump's comments are somewhat baked into our political conversation already. Do they need to work harder at making those policy distinctions, showing the things the Biden administration has done that would be different from the way the Trump administration handled it? So they've got to be careful about chasing every shiny object with Trump, or you're just going to be going in a lot of different directions. But I know their team, and they're very disciplined. It doesn't surprise me that they put out a video on social media. That's not where they're putting their money on advertising. One of the things one of the biggest mistakes Trump has made was when he said a week ago that he was going to cut or put on the table cutting Social Security and Medicare, which is a real issue that has resonance with voters that both candidates need. And the Biden campaign was quick to respond to that and go up on the offensive there. So they're going to do certain things. Biden campaign will do certain things on social media and when they raise money. But when they're actually putting their money into their advertising and what he's saying on the stump, they're going to lean into the economy. They're going to lean into a future-focused message. And that's where they should be.
It doesn't seem, Garrett, though, that the Trump campaign's running away from this, right? Like, obviously, he continues to say these things on the stump. But I want to show you this poll, too, specifically on January 6th, that shows a significant drop in Republicans who think Joe Biden was legitimately elected. I mean, look at these numbers. They've actually gone down. And also the number of Republicans who thinks he bears responsibility for January 6th. And they also think the punishments for the rioters weren't harsh enough. It doesn't seem as though Donald Trump his campaign is hurting it at all by the more he kind of pumps this divisive rhetoric into the ether.
No, and I think Republican elected officials have fallen in line. I mean, look no further than Mitch McConnell, who was kind of the last man standing in what might be considered the Republican resistance to Trump among elected officials, giving his, albeit tepid, endorsement the other day. Someone who stood on the floor of the Senate and said Donald Trump was responsible for what happened on January 6th. And I think what you're seeing here is, as Brendan alluded to, the idea that Donald Trump's whole campaign is about making Joe Biden unacceptable. And if even Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell can hold hands and say that Donald Trump is somehow better for the country than is Joe Biden, that's going to kind of permeate the discourse and the sort of background music for all of this campaign. And I think you see it in numbers like that, where the rest of the Republican field or the rest of the Republican electorate is, at least to some degree, willing to kind of hold their nose and look the other way about some of this odious conduct by the former president.
Now, it's lost on us a little bit that this event in Ohio that Trump was at was actually him stumping for a Senate candidate whose name we haven't even mentioned yet. But this was a primary that's tomorrow in Ohio. There is a very competitive Republican primary. The Trump-backed Senate candidate, Bernie Moreno, that's who Trump was there to support. This is what he said yesterday. Let's play a bit of that.
A vote for Dolan is a vote for 1980s Republicans that we thought were extinct, but unfortunately they haven't. But on Tuesday, we'll make it finally extinct here in Ohio. The reality is Matt Dolan is called the base election deniers and conspiracy theorist. He refuses to endorse President Trump even today. A year ago, he said he might not even make that endorsement. So the reality is the base is much larger here. The rest of the Republican establishment will focus behind my race because what they will realize is that together we will defeat Sherrod Brown.
So this is Bernie Moreno basically tossing out the establishment part of the Republican Party, the Nikki Haley brand for now, as a way to describe it. But even though we think of Ohio as being a pretty red state, it's a state that elected Mike DeWine governor. It's a state that recently elected Rob Portman to the Senate. Is this a smart strategy on his part, Brendan, to basically push the establishment out of the way and say, this is the future of the Republican Party?
It's also a state that's a sitting Democratic senator that they're trying to knock off.
Trying to beat, right.
So one of the things that a lot of Republicans internalized from Donald Trump winning in 2016 is that you don't ever have to worry about the middle. And it's a popular thing for a lot of Republicans. You only get to worry about base Republicans. You never need to moderate. You never need to worry about independents. Ted Cruz has been sort of throwing that philosophy out for a long time. It's exciting to people. And if you think like I can just, be in my one bubble the entire time, great, let me do it. It's very risky. Yeah. I'm sorry, the middle decides elections almost every time. Almost every time the middle is going to decide an election, even in Ohio. So, yeah, I think it's risky. Has Ohio turned red enough where it may not matter? Maybe. But to say to people like Nikki Haley voters who don't like Democrats, don't like Joe Biden, but are looking for a place to go home, you basically tell them to stay home.
Yeah.
Stay home. I mean, what does that do for you?
Right. I mean, Donald Trump, and I don't mean this pejoratively, is the most polarizing person on the planet, right? For him, that's the only strategy that works, is to ignore the middle and go for your people. You're not going to convince voters in the middle that you're a different Donald Trump. But for Senate candidates, who by and large are going to be relatively unknown, comparatively speaking, there's a lot of fertile ground there to recruit new voters if you want to do
There's
it.
a very poor track record of people who are not Donald Trump trying to be like Donald Trump.
And Daniella, quickly, before we go, I mean, are they missing female voters, people that could make the difference in a state like Ohio?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we're seeing Carrie Lake standing next to Bernie Moreno campaigning, because they are aware that they need that demographic to win that state. But to add what you just said, Democrats are very aware that they need the middle, and that's why we're seeing them pump money into boosting Bernie Moreno ahead of tomorrow's primary, because they know that he, facing a general election with Sherrod Brown, who's the Democrat, who's the senator in Ohio, he could possibly lose, versus someone like Matt Dolan, who has the governor's endorsement, someone who won't endorse Donald Trump, a more establishment Republican.
All right.
Another dangerous strategy.
Yeah.
We're going to have to leave it there, guys. Great conversation as always. We appreciate it. Garrett, Daniella, Doug, Brendan, we appreciate all being here.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.